On this channel called Million Dollars Made Easy, we like to look at what the S&P 500 has done over the last 100 years. We look at it in every possible scenario. We look at it during the Depression years. We look at it in the dot-com bubble years. We look at it in the oil embargo years. Because one thing you need to realize is, yes, the market does go down at times. But if you can be in it for 30 or 35 years, you're going to just see amazing numbers. And that's what we want to look at in this video. It's always important to understand that the market does go down and has those years where it goes down. And sometimes, like the 1930s, it goes down a lot. Like 6 times in that decade, the market went down. But I want you to watch these numbers as we go through here over a 35-year period. These are the actual averages. For example, in 1929, the 10-year average for the next 10 years, market average 4.54. But look, if you go out to 35 years, 11.37, and you'll find that over and over again. In other words, what I'm saying is, even though the market in 1929 had 13 down years out of the next 35, look at the kind of numbers, and we're going to look at those in just a second, the kind of returns you had in 1929. You don't just want to look at the 10-year average. For example, if you go down through this column, you're going to find a whole decade that the average is only 0.67. And yet, if you carry it out for 35 years, the lowest you're going to find in this column is 11.15. What does an 11% return look like? Let's look at these numbers here. Let's take somebody, again, we're projecting ahead for the next 30 or 35 years. And we're assuming that the market's going to do no worse than it did in the last 100 years and no better either. But we're just going to run the numbers for every single year. And if I ran the numbers $500 a month, somebody that makes $60,000 a year, 10% of that would be $500 a month. And we're going to increase that by 3% a year. We're going to see where an individual might be if the market does anything like it does, for example, in 1923 for the next 35 years. In 1923, you can see the average for the next 30 years was 12.55. What did that result in? It resulted in, after a 35-year period, having $2.715 million in their account. After 40 years, it was $5.170 million. Let's actually look at the worst case scenario, which you would think would be 1929. So we're going to move 1929 all the way up here. The same scenario, $500 a month, increasing it by 3% a year. Again, we're projecting what might be happening in the next 30 or 35 years and using historical data. Look at this, 1929. Your average for the next 30 years, beginning in 1929, would have been 11.48. And look at the kind of numbers we're talking about here. After 30 years, 2.470 million. And after 35 years, $4 million. Again, this is projecting ahead using the returns that we had beginning in 1929 for the next 35 and 40 years. And look at the numbers. Here's the numbers right here. And what we've done is run this for every single scenario for the last 100 years with all these different possible 35-year runs, and see the kind of numbers we're looking at. The important thing to see is to just see how you need to be in it for the long term. Don't look for a 10-year return, because you might run into a buzzsaw like down here where you have 6 down years. But if you can be in it for 30 or 35 years, you're going to see this over and over again. The last 100 years, no matter what scenario the market's doing, you're going to end up in great shape. In fact, so much so that the worst amount you're going to see in this column with this scenario, $500 a month, increasing by 3% a year, is $1.86 million just doing this, contributing 10% of your income if you're making $60,000. This is the kind of numbers. And yet, even during the Depression years, look at the kind of numbers we're looking at after 35 and 40 years. Why? Because the market always comes back, sometimes big time, 53%, 47%, or whatever. The 1980s and 90s were really good. If you started like in 1970 and got hit with these initially, you still came out really well. In fact, in every scenario, the worst case scenario, you're going to have $1.860 million with this scenario. People will say, well, what about inflation? I did this just out of curiosity. In 2023, the median income, according to the Census Bureau, was $76,320. If you would put 10% into that, which is what we like to recommend, putting in 10%. Again, I'm no financial advisor, but if you would put in $650 a month for the next 35 years, running it at the numbers, in the worst case scenario, you're going to have $2.419 million. Let me show you this right here. $650 a month. Watch this minimum right here. We're going to update it. This is using all the numbers from the last 100 years. You're going to see $2.419 million given that scenario. That's why I just love the S&P 500. That's why I want to get this information out to as many people as possible. If you have 30 or 35 years ahead of you and you get the returns using whatever the worst case scenario in the last 100 years, you're still going to have a minimum of 2.419 million. And financial experts recommend that you have 10% saved up of what your ending income is. At the 3% rate, the 76,000 that you make is going to go to 180,000. Take that times 10, 1.809, and yet in the worst case scenario of in the next 35 years, you would end up with 2.419, well over that 10 times that financial advisors recommend. That's why I want to get these numbers out. Even in the worst case scenario, you're going to come out with way more than what the experts recommend you have when you retire. That's the magic of the S&P 500, staying in with it, not a 10-year, not a 20-year, but a 35-year average. This is the kind of money averaging 11% a year. Hopefully these numbers make sense to you. Consider subscribing. Let people know these numbers. Let them know not to panic when the market's going down, just to hang in there, because every time it's worked in the last 100 years, if you just stay with it, you'll get amazing returns. Please subscribe to this channel. Please share it with others and like it. And let's get this channel up so people can see what's going on and how they can plan accordingly. Thanks for watching.